Welcome to Dice and Quills, where the art of storytelling meets the roll of the dice. I am Darren Ruckle, professional game master and TTRPG writer, here to share the craft behind world building, adventure design, and running unforgettable games. Whether you're a fellow creator, an aspiring pro, or a lifelong player, you're in the right place. So sharpen your quills, ready your dice, and let's dive into the worlds we imagine. Today we're cracking open one of the most misunderstood tools in the tabletop role-playing game, the player-character backstory. Every GM has been there. A new player shows up with a backstory that's 20 pages long, complete with noble houses, recent betrayals, lost siblings, and a full timeline of invented wars. Or the opposite, someone sends in a single sentence, orc barbarian, bad temper, likes to hit stuff. And you, the GM, are stuck in the middle. You want player investment. You want hooks, but you also want something usable. You want narrative threads that you can actually weave into the story, not just lore dumps or diary entries. Today's episode is going to dig into the real function of a backstory. What's it for? How to encourage good ones, what to look for, and most importantly, how to use them in a way that keeps the players invested without derailing your campaign. But here's the truth. A backstory isn't a resume. It's not a confessional. It's not a demand. It's a starting place, a signal, a flare launch into the dark that says, here's what I care about. And your job, especially as a professional GM, is to take the flare and build a story around it that both respects the player's intent and serves the table as a whole. We'll talk about how to spot red flags, how to turn vague ideas into gold, and how to handle backstory-heavy players without shortchanging the rest of the party. We'll even talk about onboarding, how to guide new players towards building backstories that are rich and lean. But before we get into mechanics and tools, let's start with the bigger picture. What is a backstory really for? Because if you don't understand its purpose, you're going to misuse it. At its core, a backstory is a contract, informal, sometimes messy, but a contract nonetheless. The player is telling you, here's the story I want to be part of. Not the plot, the emotional journey, the themes, the kind of conflicts they're interested in. It's a window into a player's desire. That noble exile isn't just lore. It's a player saying, I want to explore power, legacy, and shame. That wandering healer looking for a lost cure, that's a player asking, can I find hope in a world that's broken? That two-sentence amnesiac, that's someone saying, surprise me, I'm ready for mystery. If you ignore the backstory or treat it like flavor text, you miss the chance to build something personal. But if you treat it as gospel or the blueprint for the entire campaign, you risk tying your story to something static and potentially incomplete. The key is to see the backstory as a signal, not a script. It's raw material. A backstory isn't a character story, it's the story before the story. And you, as GM, are going to turn it into the story to come. When you receive a character's backstory, whether it's a paragraph or 10 pages, your first job is to mine it for plot points. Your job is to listen, not to the character, but to the player. Because every backstory, whether it's sprawling or sparse, is a coded message. It tells you what kind of story the player is hoping to participate in, what themes they gravitate towards, what kinds of conflict they care about, what they're expecting you to do with their past. That means your first question should never be, how do I include the evil uncle? Or, where do I place this lost heirloom? Your first question should be, what emotional arc is the player asking for? If a player writes about a disgraced noble who lost their title after being falsely accused, they're not just giving you court drama. They're asking for a redemption arc, for justice, maybe revenge, maybe the discovery of what truly matters. If a party sends you a character with no memories, a tattoo of a symbol they don't understand, and a deep fear of the sea, they're not just setting up mystery. They're telling you, I want a story where I can uncover who I really am. This is what I mean by reading for intent. So here's how I approach every backstory. First, I skim for tone. Is it serious, tragic, silly? If the tone wildly clashes with your campaign, that's a conversation, not a rejection, but a chance to recalibrate expectations. Second, I'll read it for themes, not events, but ideas. Is this a story about loss, identity, betrayal, belonging? Look for the emotional through lines. Third, I mark any clear asks. That's anything that sets up a mystery or open question. A missing person, a half-finished quest, a promise unfulfilled. Those are easy inroads for future story beats, but only if they serve the campaign as a whole. Fourth, I check for risks. This could be backstories that are too rigid, too big, or too dependent on being the center of attention. A character who claims to be the chosen one, the rightful heir, the slayer of gods. Great flavor, but often problematic if not handled with care. And I finally ask, how much of this do they actually want explored? Because not every player wants their backstory to be a central plotline. Some just want color, a reason to be there. Others expect deep arcs and resolution. The only way to know? Ask them. That part is key. Talk to your players. Even if their backstory is short, say, hey, what kind of story do you imagine for your character? Even if their backstory is long, ask, which parts of this are most important to you? Which ones can I use? And which are just for fun? This one step, this conversation, solved so many problems. You avoid building a huge arc around something they don't really care about. You avoid skipping something they secretly hoped would be pivotal. And most of all, you build trust. Because backstory integration isn't about surprising your players. It's about honoring their investment. They put effort into their character's history. You put effort into making that history mean something. Let's talk about how to help your players write better backstories. Not longer, not more detailed, but better. Meaning useful to you, grounded in the game lore, and aligned with the kind of story you're telling altogether. Because here's the truth. Most players aren't taught how to write a character backstory. They imitate what they've seen online, or they write something like a novel excerpt, or they assume they need a tragic origin to be interesting. Some barely write anything at all because they're afraid of doing it wrong. So your job as a GM, especially as a professional GM, is to teach by asking. Don't start with, write me a backstory. Start with a few guiding questions. What's one event from your character's past that still haunts or motivates them? Who's one person they cared about, and are they still in the picture? What made them leave their old life behind and take up adventuring? What do they want that they've never asked for? Simple, evocative questions like these give you far more to work with than a generic paragraph of names and places. They also help players focus on character emotion, not just character history. And here's a really useful one. What's one thing your character would do anything to avoid facing again? That tells you where the pain is, where the tension lives, where the campaign might intersect with something powerful. You can give these questions in advance or drop them during session 0. Either way, make it clear. The goal isn't to write a novel. It's to give you a window into the kind of story they want to be part of. Now, what about the players who love to write? The ones who hand you backstories longer than your campaign outline? Again, don't punish them. Channel it. Thank them for the effort. Acknowledge their creativity. And then say something like, there's a lot of great material here. To help me prep more efficiently, could you highlight the 3 most important beats you'd love to see explored? This is gentle boundary setting. It says, I care about your work, and I'm going to use it, but I need your help focusing it. And most players, when asked, will do exactly that. They'll say, oh yeah, the missing sister is the big one. Or, that prophecy stuff was just flavor. I don't need it to be literal. And now you know where to aim. Here's another trick. Ask players to leave open questions in their backstory. Instead of, my parents were murdered by agents of the Iron Circle, they might say, my parents disappeared when I was 12. Everyone says it was the Iron Circle, but no one really knows. Boom! Now you've got a mystery you can shape. You're not boxed into an answer. You're invited to make it interesting. Encouraging ambiguity gives you narrative flexibility, and it also invites collaboration. That's key. Because the best backstories don't just give you content. They invite you to co-author the past, and then thread it into the future. So now you've got your players' backstories. They're thoughtful, they're usable, and they've given you the green light to pull some of those threads into your campaign. Now the question is, how? How do you integrate those details in a way that feels meaningful, organic, and most importantly, fair to the whole group? Because this is the trap a lot of GMs fall into. One player has a really detailed backstory, and before long the campaign becomes about them. They're the lost heir. They're the prophesized savior. Everyone else is tagging along. Or you avoid it entirely. You tell yourself you'll get to it later, and by session 20, those juicy hooks are still sitting unused because they never fit neatly into the story you were telling. There's a better way. Let's start with this principle. A backstory beat should feel like a discovery, not a detour. That means when a player's past shows up, it should feel like part of the story, not an interruption of it. The key is timing and subtlety. Let's say your rogue has a backstory about an estranged sibling who betrayed them. You don't need to launch a sibling arc right away. Instead, maybe a bounty hunter shows up in session 5. Not for the rogue, but for someone the party just rescued. But this bounty hunter? He used to work for that sibling. He drops a name. The rogue tenses. Everyone else sees it. You didn't make the session about the rogue, but you gave them a moment, a thread, a hook. And now they're wondering when it will come back. And so is everyone else. That's the magic. Plant, don't dump. Another example. Your paladin's backstory mentions being excommunicated from their order. You don't need to start with a trial and a grand conspiracy. Just introduce an NPC who's still in the order. Someone who recognizes the paladin and looks away. Now there's tension, questions. And you've told the player, your past matters. I'm listening. Here's a rhythm I use. Small references early. A name, a symbol, a rumor. Medium beats later. An encounter, a letter, a choice. Big reveals only when earned. When the player has grown, when the party has context, and when the moment feels earned by the campaign, not forced by the GM. This lets the backstory feel like a natural thread, not a spotlight hog. Also, involve the party. If a backstory arc kicks off, find ways for other players to participate. Maybe the bard can talk down an old enemy. Maybe the cleric has insight into the player's forgotten religion. Maybe the fighter recognizes a name from their own travels. Don't let it be a solo moment. Make it a group challenge, one that deepens relationships and invites investment. And remember, backstories aren't just for drama, they're also for joy. That quiet moment when a ranger sees their childhood village again. The celebration when a warlock reunites with their found family. The moment when the fighter, the one who's told he'd never be worth anything, is knighted by the same order that turned him away. These are your emotional payoffs. And when you tie them to events the party worked for, they land twice as hard. But here's the hard truth. Not every backstory beat will be usable. Some just won't fit. Some might conflict with the evolving narrative. And that's okay. The trick is to choose which threads to pull, and then pull them well. Let's talk about what happens when everyone brings a backstory. Not just one rich emotional arc, but 4, 5, sometimes 6 full-fledged character histories, all filled with unresolved trauma, mysterious origins, missing siblings, ancient rivalries, and of course, each of them is secretly the center of a potential novel. It's a good problem to have. Players are invested. They're shown up with characters who matter to them. That's the dream, but it's also a juggling act. And if you're not careful, your campaign starts to split into competing solo narratives, each player waiting for their moment while others check out. So here's what I want to offer you. A mindset shift. You don't need to resolve every character's arc individually. You just need to make each of them feel seen. That's it. Seen, heard, and acknowledged. That's what matters. You don't need to write 5 plot lines. You need 5 meaningful intersections. When one character's story comes forward, that's your chance to pull others into the tension. Connect the dots. Maybe a noble secret past implicates a rogue's former guild. Maybe the warlock's patron is tangled up in the paladin's lost faith. Maybe 2 characters are chasing answers that come from the same source. You're not telling separate stories. You're building a web. And the more your players see that web form, the more their arcs feel connected, not competitive. It also helps to manage pacing across arcs. Don't try to advance every backstory every session. Let them breathe. Let one player's past take center stage for a few sessions, then shift. Create beats where one arc recedes and another rises. Players are often more patient with spotlight sharing when they know their moment is coming, and even more so when they're involved in someone else's. Here's something else that helps. Reoccurring symbols or threads that show up in multiple arcs. It might be a faction, a myth, a prophecy, a place, a character. Something that, whether directly or indirectly, echoes across more than one backstory. Now the players feel like their characters are all part of something larger. It binds them to the world and to each other. But what do you do when a player starts demanding that their backstory be the plot? That's tough, especially if they've come to the table expecting a personal saga. If you're already mid-campaign and someone starts pushing hard for their moment, you need to have a private conversation. Not confrontational, invitational. Tell them what you've got planned. Let them know you want to explore their story, but that the campaign is a shared experience. Ask them what's most important from their backstory, what they're hoping for. Then see if you can work that into the existing arc, not as a full detour, but as a thread that strengthens what's already there. Most players will respond well to that. They want to matter, and they want to know you care. If they feel you're listening, even if their spotlight is delayed, they'll stay invested. On the flip side, if a player writes no backstory at all, don't pressure them. Just give them opportunities to develop one in play. Let them have a vision. Let them meet someone from their past they didn't know they'd forgotten. Let the world provoke their curiosity and see what emerges. You'd be surprised how many players grow into their backstories once they trust that the story is worth anchoring themselves to. Let's talk about the backstories that make you pause. The ones that come in like a freight train, full of major world events, demanding on the setting, contradictions with your lore, or tone clashes so stark they feel like they belong to a different game entirely. You know the ones. A character who claims to be the lost prince of a kingdom that doesn't exist on your map. A war veteran who fought in a conflict you never wrote. A sorcerer who has a destiny to kill a god, but your campaign isn't even about gods. Here's what you do when that happens. You don't reject it outright. You translate it. Remember what we talked about earlier? The backstory isn't a script. It's a signal. So instead of fixating on what doesn't work, ask yourself what the player was trying to express. If they wrote a story about royal blood and lost lineage, maybe they're craving significance. Maybe they want recognition or a sense of identity they've never had in real life. If they wrote a massive war with shifting alliances, maybe they love political intrigue. Maybe they want a campaign where their decisions ripple outward and change the world. So step one is always to interpret the intent, then talk to the player. You might say, "This is great. I love the energy here. I'd love to bring in some of these elements, but we'll need to tweak a few things to fit the world we're building together. Can we make this prince a noble from a fallen house instead? Maybe the war wasn't with another nation, but a rebellion that was covered up? What do you think?" Now it's a collaboration. You're not editing them, you're co-creating. Most players will not only accept this, they'll love it, because it means you're taking their story seriously. You're helping them root it into the world in a way that makes it more likely to show up and matter. But what if they won't budge? What if they've already imagined their arc, beginning to end, and they expect you to run it? That's when you have to draw a boundary, kindly but clearly. You might say, "I love that you built so much detail here. I want to make sure we can integrate it in a way that works for everyone at the table. This campaign is a shared story, and I want to be fair about spotlight and pacing. So I may not be able to follow every beat you've imagined, but I promise I'll bring in the parts that serve the story we're building together." And if they're open to collaboration, they'll get it. If they push back, you'll need to make a choice. Do you try to accommodate them and risk the campaign's cohesion? Or do you hold the ground and potentially lose their buy-in? That's a hard line to walk, but in my experience, most players are reasonable when they feel heard. Sometimes the fix is as simple as giving them an early win. Let them resolve a piece of their backstory quickly. Let them see that you're willing to explore it, and then gently guide the rest of the arc to unfold more slowly, more collaboratively, and more in sync with the group. And here's a trick that works wonders. Use their backstory to introduce a shared threat. Maybe the Lost Prince isn't the only one with enemies. Maybe the war has ties to another character's missing parent. Maybe the god they were meant to kill has been whispered about in other places. Now their story isn't competing, it's converging. And that's the heart of it. Backstories shouldn't be individual campaigns in disguise. They should be building blocks, invitations, signals that you, as the GM, can shape into something bigger than what any player imagined on their own. Let's talk about timing. Because when you bring a character's backstory into the campaign matters just as much as how you bring it in. Too early and it might not land. Too late and the moment has passed. The sweet spot is when the player has already lived in the world for a while, when the player is grounded in the role, and when the table is emotionally primed to care. That's when you strike. And when you do, you don't need fanfare. You don't need to frame it as, your backstory arc starts now. You just need the right moment, something small, grounded, and deeply personal. Let's say a character has a long-lost sibling. You don't open with that sibling walking to town with a sword and a grudge. You start with a letter, a rumor, someone at a tavern who heard a name that matches. You watch the player's face. You feel the table shift. You know what's happening, even if the rest of the party doesn't. That's the power of recognition, that slow build, that tension of, wait, is this really happening? Or maybe it's a villain from the past, an old master, a betrayer. You don't start with a battle. You start with a sign, a scarred coin left on a windowsill, a black feather in a sealed envelope, the smell of their cologne on the wind. It's subtle, it's atmospheric, and it tells the player, I remember. That's all it takes to light the fuse, because now the player is leading forward. They're not just in the game, they're emotionally tied to it. And here's the real secret. When the callback comes, make sure it gives the party something to do. Too many backstory reveals become monologues. The GM and the player talk while the rest of the table watches. Don't fall into that trap. If the villain shows up, make sure the party has to decide whether to help. If the sibling is found, let the cleric be the one to stop the fight. If the prophecy drops, let the wizard be the one to explain it. Weave the personal info into the communal. That's where the gold is. And don't forget the small callbacks. Not every backstory moment has to be dramatic. The old tavern where they grew up, the scent of lavender that reminds them of home, a child with the same name as their mother. These aren't plot beats, they're emotional anchors. They remind the player that their character came from somewhere, that their past isn't just words on a page, but something alive in the world. When you give a player a moment like that, especially without warning, it lands hard. You see it in their body, the breath that catches, the pause before they speak. That's when you know you've made the world feel real, not just for them, but for everyone else at the table too. Because even the players whose backstories haven't come up yet will feel it. They'll say, wow, I hope my character gets a moment like that. And if you're doing your job well, they will, in time. Not every backstory makes it to the spotlight. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, a player's past just doesn't fit into the story you're telling. Maybe the campaign took a sharp turn. Maybe the arc they were hoping for never came into focus. Or maybe they didn't give you much to work with in the first place. Just a name, a class, and a vague reason for adventuring. This is where GMs start to worry. They don't want anyone to feel left out. You don't want one character's history to become legend while another's fade in the background. But here's the truth. A character's impact to the table isn't determined by how often their backstory comes up. It's determined by how much they matter in the story being told now. You can make a player feel seen without ever referencing their past. Start by giving them present tense meaning. Let them make important choices. Let them lead the charge, broker the deal, notice the clue. Let the world react to them, not because of who they were, but because of what they do. That's how you show a player that their character matters, even without callbacks. But that doesn't mean you can't still seed something in. If the story allows it, even in a small way, find a window. Maybe you invent a detail. Maybe you work with what little they gave you. If a character had no backstory, but you know they love combat, introduce an old rival from the fighting pits. If they're a loner with no past, let them find a place that feels like home and watch how they react. Sometimes it's not about what you honor from the past, it's about what you offer in the present. A new connection, a new stake, a reason to care about where they're going, even if they never cared about where they came from. And if a player expresses disappointment, if they say, I wish we've done more with my character's back history, that's not failure. That's an opportunity you can say, let's do it. Tell me what part you wanted to explore. Then work it in. Maybe not with a full arc, but with a moment, a scene, a callback, something just for them. Even late in a campaign, those moments land. And here's something else to consider. Sometimes the player didn't want a backstory to begin with. Maybe they were nervous. Maybe they didn't think it would matter. But over time, as the game goes on, they fall in love with their character. They want to start building something retroactively. Let them. Let them say, hey, I think my character trained with someone in this city. Or, I actually imagine they used to serve in the guard. Maybe someone here remembers them. And when they do, treat it like canon. Don't make them write it out. Just nod and say, that sounds great. Tell me a bit more about that. And then bring it in. Because backstories don't have to be pre-written. They can evolve. They can grow with the campaign. They can emerge from play. And often, those organic backstories, the ones that form because of the campaign, are the most powerful of all. Let's talk about endings. Because no matter how rich or detailed a character backstory is, no matter how deeply you wove it into your sessions, it's the ending that leaves the mark. Not just the end of the campaign, but the end of their personal arc. The moment when something clicks into place, a question is answered, a burden is lifted, a promise fulfilled or finally broken. As a GM, you have a rare kind of power here. You can help craft closure, and closure doesn't mean wrapping every thread neatly. It means delivering a moment that feels right, that reflects the journey the characters had taken and the players who lived it. So how do you do that? Start by watching for the natural beat. You don't always need to plan the final moment in advance. Sometimes the perfect conclusion sneaks up on you. Maybe the rogue finally lets go of their grudge. Maybe the warlock says no to the patron. Maybe the fighter takes off the armor and chooses peace. You'll feel it when it's coming. The table goes quiet. The player hesitates. And you'll know this is the moment. When you see it, lean into it. Let the silence stretch. Let the scene breathe. Don't rush the resolution. These are the moments players remember for years. If it's a moment you can plan, work with the player. Ask what kind of closure they want. Some want a full redemption arc. Others want ambiguity. Some want their story to end with a sacrifice. Others want to ride into the sunset, mystery intact. There's no right answer, only what fits the tone of your game and honors the arc the players has built. Sometimes a player retires their character before the campaign ends. Maybe the arc feels complete. Maybe they're ready for something new. That's a gift. Treat it that way. Give them an exit that feels earned. A final mission, a personal choice, a farewell scene. Not a fade to black, a closing line. And when the whole campaign ends, give each character a denouement, one paragraph, one beat. Where do they go? Who do they become? What echoes of their backstories still remain? Because here's the thing. When you close the loop, you don't just reward the player. You validate their investment. You prove that their backstory mattered, not just as a tool for you, but as a piece of shared storytelling. Even if the arc was small, even if it didn't change the world, you make it matter by letting it land. And for some players, that's more important than loot or levels or victories. It's what gives the characters life. You give the campaign weight. So let's bring it all home. Backstories aren't a formality. They're not a box to check or a tool to exploit. They're the heartbeat beneath the story, the emotional blueprint of what your players hope to experience and what their characters hope to become. As a professional GM, your job isn't just to use backstories, it's to honor them, to read between the lines, to find the signal in the noise, to ask not, what is this character, but what does this player want to feel? You don't need epic histories to tell a great story. You need clarity. You need conversation. You need a willingness to listen, to adapt, and to thread the personal into the collective, so that when the party moves forward, it's not just along a map, but along emotional lines that resonate. Whether you're guiding a group of veterans or onboarding brand new players, the same principles apply. Ask for intention. Build on what they gave you. Keep it collaborative. Let arcs emerge. And when the moment comes, when a name is spoken, or a scar remembered, or a vow fulfilled, let it breathe. Let it matter. Because immersion doesn't just come from descriptive or music or mechanics. It comes from meaning, and meaning starts in the past. Next time on Dice and Quills, we're going to explore one of the most delicate skills in your toolkit, saying no. Whether it's to a mechanic, a build, a behavior, or an idea, setting boundaries is part of your job, and we'll talk about how to do it with clarity, respect, and authority. We'll cover real examples, personal stories, and the art of protecting the table while keeping the fun alive. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating the podcast, or sharing it with someone who's trying to level up their GM craft. Every little bit helps more than you know. And if you've got a story about a backstory, a moment that hit hard, or one that went off the rails, I want to hear it. Tag me, message me. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, sharpen your quills, ready your dice, and remember, every great story begins long before the first session. It begins with who your characters are and why they chose to fight, love, fall, rise, and keep going. The past matters. Make it sing.